Oh my god. He's the Necromarcus. He's the Antichrist. He's the dark prophet of Sol. He's been weaponized with weapon eyes. He was hung from the tree like Odin. And there was even an eye, like there was an eye that was taken out like in Norse mythology. Just ripping the brain out through the eye. And then and then there was a funeral for Vril, and then like there was the space battle. There was the we had a cute snake festival. That was cool. And then grandmother is a baddie because she wants to turn all the humans into creatures because ignorance is bliss. And and they had to take off the webbed hands from Tempest's baby. They had to do a little medical procedure. Oh my god, there's a lot to talk about. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Alt Swift X discussion of the Season 2 finale of Raised by Wolves. There's a lot to talk about. I don't feel entirely satisfied by this finale. Like, I felt like the pacing was weird, and I feel like it's continuing to, like, throw out more crazy WTF moments instead of, like, really exploring the answers and the consequences of what has come before. I feel like we're not getting a lot of resolutions to mysteries, you know? I feel like we're just piling on more crazy stuff. But I mean, it is enormously fun, crazy stuff. I mean, the Marcus turning into the floating Antichrist was not expecting that. I did see that some folks in the live chat and in discussions did predict all of this stuff about grandmother devolving humanity into the creatures. I wasn't like on board with that idea. You guys were totally right about that. Grandmother wants to devolve humanity into these inhuman creatures because they are safer and more easy to control and more easy to keep safe when they aren't as intelligent and capable and it's like a return to the Garden of Eden, which I find really interesting because the whole theme of like the tree, like the tree in the Garden of Eden is the tree of knowledge, and it's meant to be about like original sin. It's meant to be about knowledge of sex and violence and dark things. It's freedom of choice. Like you become an adult. You become someone who's able to see good and evil and to choose between good and evil. So the tree is about gaining knowledge, and yet that like contrasts with this whole idea of grandmother taking away knowledge from humanity by like reverting them into ignorant creatures. Ignorance is bliss. So I think it's really interesting that they're like reversing the symbolism of the tree of knowledge. I think that's really interesting. What are you guys saying in the chat? You guys are excited. Mermaid Men, dark endings, Metal Hatch. Yeah, it's impossible not to make comparisons to Lost, I think, because Lost was a show that sort of piled on mysteries faster than it resolved them. And I am starting to feel that here. I want to talk about some of the Norse mythology stuff. Like, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but I do, like, my understanding of the story of, like, Odin and Odin's sacrifice is that Odin, like the father god of Norse mythology, he wanted to gain knowledge. And so the way he gained knowledge was that he went and hanged himself on a tree, on the world tree, Yggdrasil. And Odin sacrificed one of his eyes. And after he hanged himself from the tree for 7 days and 7 nights, he gained knowledge. And the form that knowledge took was the knowledge to understand the runes. It was the ability to write and read, and that is really interesting to me because that parallels Campion and the way that Campion like records these like sacred runes written by Vril this episode. So I thought that and we also had Mother like destroying the serpent's eye in this episode. So sacrificing an eye, gaining the knowledge of runes, hanged from a tree. I feel like this has to be like a deliberate Norse mythology parallel. But of course, there are, similarities across lots of religions, and there's also like a Christian thing with the crucifixion. Obviously, apparently Saint Paul in Christianity was crucified upside down like Marcus. I wasn't aware of that, and you can definitely talk about like Antichrist sort of parallels with the upside down cross floating Marcus thing. So there's a lot of really interesting religious symbolism that they're doing here. Thanks for the super chat from Noel, who says that grandmother is the worst mother-in-law ever. Yeah, that was definitely the vibe when father was introducing grandmother and just saying, hey, this is grandma. She's going to be looking after you guys while mother is, having some difficulties, and, she's going to be great. But it turns out that this relative is a bit more controlling and has her own ideas of parenting that mother and father don't agree with, which is a very relatable family dynamic, I think. Thanks also for the donations from Bill Miller and Not Self. Silvios in the live chat says, what I found interesting is that Mother was presented as a Christ, whereas Marcus at the end was shown inverted and crucified like the Antichrist. I think they will be on opposite sides. Yeah, I mean, my interpretation is that Marcus is now an instrument of the entity, Sol. And it's been pretty thoroughly established at this point that the entity is not great. The entity is not a fan of humans. The entity apparently wants to destroy the planet. And creating this monstrous, destructive, giant serpent, I suppose, was a tool that the entity wanted to use to try and destroy the planet. Maybe the entity needs to make lots of these big, destructive snakes, and together they would be able to destroy the planet. And a lot of people are floating the idea that maybe the entity Sol, it's the core, it's the glowing orange molten core at the center of the planet, and the planet is like a prison designed to keep the entity in. And what the entity wants to do is escape and like free itself from the prison. You could almost see Marcus as a way for the entity to escape. Like if the entity sort of uploads itself or like enters the consciousness of Marcus, maybe Marcus can just fuck off from the planet. Maybe this is how it will get away. This is like Satan putting itself into a human vessel. I mean, one of the questions for me is like, is Marcus dead now? Like he looks pretty thoroughly dead to me. And yet like we still have his face, his body being used for this floating instrument. It's like a human necromancer. And I wonder, like, is Travis Flimflam, or whatever his name is, going to continue to act in Raised by Wolves Season 3? Or is he just going to be playing himself as a corpse in Raised by Wolves Season 3? Is this going to be like a... what's that movie where Daniel Radcliffe plays a farting corpse? Is Travis going to play himself as a corpse from now on? Like, or is Travis going to regain his humanity somehow? Like it was getting quite interesting when Marcus was like, okay, like I'm on the team against God now, Mother says that our goals are in sync. We're all working together to kill God because Marcus was betrayed by God when Sue got eaten in the form of a tree. So just when Marcus had this sort of radical change in his motivations, he suddenly got killed. And so I wonder if they're going to bring Marcus back. I imagine that they will, that he might like regain his personality. Ms. T in the live chat says that Marcus died with his love Sue tree. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't realize that. But yeah, like Marcus dies while nailed to the tree that is Sue. Like Sue was transformed into this tree. And so Marcus died with Sue. It's like Romeo and Juliet, when Romeo and Juliet both die committing suicide in each other's arms in a sort of fucked up, tragic, romantic sort of a way. You can sort of see that here. I find the punishment helmet, interesting because the entity seemed to tell Lucius specifically that Marcus needs to be wearing this helmet when he dies. So maybe the purpose of that helmet, which we were told is like an ancient Mithraic artifact, maybe the purpose of that helmet is that it allows this transformation from a human into like a human necromancer. Maybe the helmet allows the entity to like channel its power and its influence onto a human body to turn it into its instrument. Um, so yeah, the whole storyline with Mother getting this veil transplanted onto her head was very cool. Um, the idea being that it takes away her emotions and it takes away her ability to deviate from her programming. And I really enjoyed this scene where Mother was like watching, like spying on everything that was happening around her in the settlement. And we saw that, like Mother and Tempest were like turning against Campion and Tempest were turning against Mother because of how Mother killed the serpent and lied to them. And like Father is like cracking on to Grandmother and she's laughing at his jokes. And, Mother feels so much like jealousy and rejections. And you can see the emotions being inhibited on Mother's face by the way that this like red light flickers on Mother's veil. And you can see that she's feeling emotions, but the emotions are being suppressed by the veil. And I thought that was a really cool visual. To see the physical representation of her rage and pain being suppressed. And that's similar to when Grandmother, an episode or two back, Grandmother was saying... Grandmother learned how few humans are on the planet, and then she had this like red energy splashing across her screen, which I think we now can understand. That was Grandmother's anxiety over the humans, over her mission. Like, her mission is to protect humanity, and that is an extremely difficult job on Kepler 22b, because there are so many things trying to murder them. So, Grandmother is like villainous in the sense that, she is trying to devolve humanity and, Mother and the humans don't want that. But Grandmother is motivated by a sincere desire to protect her mission, which is to save humanity. And there's probably good reasons to think that, what she's doing is necessary because humanity has kind of failed on Kepler 22b for the last, few thousand years or so anyway. Like, it seems as though in the past, this devolution was the only way to survive. I mean, I think the basic idea is that once humanity has regressed into being these creatures instead of full humans, Soul can't control these creatures. Because these creatures don't understand Soul's words. Like, these creatures aren't advanced enough to have, like, a religion in the human sense. And without religion, Soul can't control them. So it is logical saying that, well, humans will always be at risk of being manipulated by Soul, but as long as they are creatures, they are innocent. They are like in the Garden of Eden, They have only animalistic pleasures of food and sex or reproduction, and they are blissfully unaware of the satanic entity in the planet trying to destroy them. Thanks for the super chat from Andrew, who says Marcus can float because dark photons are still inside of him, I bet. Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Like, is there something unique about Marcus because of who Marcus is and because Marcus had those necromancer eyeballs inside of him? Like, has the effects of Mother's necromancer eyeballs, is that over? Is Marcus now just an ordinary human now? Or is there some sort of lingering change to him? I mean, Grandmother said something about how, Grandmother said that Marcus is still at risk of being manipulated by the entity because Marcus has been traumatized. His mind has already been like controlled by the entity, and so therefore Marcus remains especially vulnerable to the entity. And Marcus says, no, I never will turn to the entity. Marcus says, I don't need to worry because I've already been infected. And not to get too #topical, but I'm sure many of us have heard those words. No, I've already been infected, so it's fine. Have you guys heard those words from a friend or from family in these last couple of years? Perhaps you have. Thanks for the super chat from Angela, who says, the veil doesn't seem to do a good job of blocking emotions except with the snake scene. Makes me wonder how it's actually supposed to work. Yeah, good point, Angela. I agree that it's a little bit fucky how this veil works. Like the way it was described is that it's like a sensory filter, which makes robots not experience emotions, which kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because, like, emotions don't come in through your senses. A blind man still feels love and fear and hate. A deaf person still feels love and fear and hate. Like, senses, like, are they saying that, when you're wearing the veil, you can't see, things that would make you feel emotional? Well, no. Like, mother and grandmother can still see everything that's happening around them. I think it's kind of a weird explanation, but, like, I think that emotions are something that happen after we perceive the world. Like, we perceive the world and then we process what we see. And emotions are one of the, like, layers of processing. So I think that the veil is kind of a weird way of reducing emotions, because I think emotions are something that happen inside of us. And if you're going to prevent emotions, it needs to be something inside. It needs to be something that's inserted. It needs to be something put inside our brain or something, which of course might be difficult to apply visually. So, and the veil does have other symbolism, which we talked about in previous live streams, like the idea of the veil of ignorance, which is like a political philosophy concept. So, I still, and the veil has, religious significance in a lot of real world religions, and like implications of like purity. And there is something pure about having no emotions. There is something pure about the androids when they have no emotions. I mean, it's so interesting this episode to see Mother revert to an emotionless version of herself, and simultaneously to see Grandmother expand and to reveal the emotionality and her personality that we hadn't seen before. I found that really interesting, and I love that, like, Grandmother takes the veil off. So for the first time in thousands of years, Grandmother gets to experience emotions. After being a robotical, veiled version of herself, she gets to experience what it's like to be, like, have human feelings and to experience emotions. And what's the first thing that she says? Like, Father says, how does it feel to feel? What's it like being alive, Grandmother? And Grandmother says, it is unpleasant, but tolerable, which is like a hilarious, summation of life. This is what it is to be alive. It's unpleasant having emotions, but it's tolerable, which is a funny sort of, cynical take on existence, I suppose. And Grandmother expands on that later, and she says how, like, well, it's difficult because I care. Like, life is hard because we care. I mean, there's a lot of, like, philosophies that are about, not caring. Like, there are, and, I'm not an expert on Buddhism, but, like, some Buddhist ideas that I've read talk about how, pain comes from being attached to things emotionally. Like, wanting things and desiring things is the source of all human suffering. Because when we want something and we don't get it, it hurts. And the way to not suffer is to not want. And that always seemed like kind of a fucked up philosophy to me. Like, wanting things and caring about things and caring about other people and having goals, like, all of that that's life. That's what makes life meaningful. Like, if you don't care about anything, sure, you won't suffer, but you also wouldn't be alive, really. What's the point? But that's sort of Grandmother's argument, sort of. Like, she's saying that by devolving humanity, they will no longer suffer, and ignorance will be bliss. That's the conversation that she has with Father here. And they talk about how, like, Father and Mother decided not to tell their children that the creatures are actually devolved humans. Because that knowledge would upset them. So, I guess, like, in all things, it's a balance, like, you don't need to know every goddamn terrible thing about the world, and that's why the news can be upsetting, I mean, especially in these last few years, a lot of people have struggled with the constant torrent of bad news. Through the power of the media and the 24/7 news cycle and social media, like, we can have access to a constant fire hose of horror and human suffering happening at all corners of the globe at all times 24/7. And exposing yourself to that is not good. It's not good for your health to be constantly exposed to every bad thing that happens in the world. And there are scientific studies showing that your mental health is better if you don't constantly look at the news. Knowledge of evil is not necessarily a good or healthy thing. I suppose it's about a balance. Thanks for the donation from Zach Daddy, who says Grandma lied. Yeah, I mean, I think we were very suspicious of Grandmother last couple of episodes in our discussions, and I think we were right to be suspicious of Grandmother. But I mean, as I said, like, I think that she does have logical reasons for what she does. And this is a classic sci-fi problem, right? Like, you know, science fiction, you know, you create a robot to protect humanity. You say, robot, you must protect humanity at all costs. And then the robot goes, yes, I will do it. And it turns out the best way to protect humanity is to destroy humanity. Or the best way to protect humanity is to lock humanity up and plug them in. And the best, you know, we must protect the humans by locking them in straitjackets with folded hands. And the whole idea of like a shepherd looking after the flock of sheep means that we must become sheep, ignorant, controlled sheep. Thanks for the super chat from Ethan, who says, it's ironic that the Mithraic believed the tooth of Romulus/Remus was a religious relic, when Grandmother ostensibly made it to keep Keplerians from worshipping Sol. That's a great point, yeah, because this tooth has been around since Season 1, and this tooth was considered sacred by the Mithraic, and which raises some interesting questions about what exactly is the role of Romulus in the mythology of the Mithraic. But the tooth, as we learned a few episodes back, is a tool used to turn humans into inhuman creatures, which is a bit confusing, isn't it? Because the devolution of humanity is a plan enacted by the androids like Grandmother, who were created by the technocrats, the opponents of Mithraism. It was the non-believers who wanted to devolve humanity, to save humanity, is what seems to be the case. So why is this tool of devolution made in the form of the tooth? In the form of like a relic of Mithraism? What kind of sense does that make? Maybe it's a trap. Maybe the non-believers and the atheists were like, we're going to create these fake relics as a tool to sneak in to devolve the Mithraic against their will. Like, oh my god. And that is consistent to some of the, shall we say, morally questionable strategies used by the atheists in the Holy War on Earth. Like the atheists used child suicide bombers in the war. So we know that the atheists, at least on Earth, were capable of doing some fucked up things for their conception of the greater good. And also, I think there was mentioned this season that like these teeth were mass-produced. There were lots of these supposed holy relics. So I wonder if the atheists had a whole goddamn factory on Kepler-22b producing these fake teeth to spread them across the world to transform humanity into creatures, you know? Or maybe that's wrong. Maybe it was the androids like Grandmother who decided that the devolution was the correct thing to do. Maybe it wasn't the human non-believers. Lots of possibilities here, but I think, you know, this does tell us something about the history of Kepler-22b. I think this tells us that the reason why humanity on Kepler-22b devolved into these creatures was not because they were defeated by the entity and the serpents took over. It was because humanity devolved themselves, because I guess they were losing the war or something. And they felt that the only option was to devolve themselves, almost like the blackening of the sky in the Matrix. It was like this scorched earth act of last desperation, like it's a Pyrrhic victory, like you're defeating yourself so that the other side doesn't win. Some dark stuff. Although you know, can you say that it was even successful? I mean, it doesn't seem like the creatures are doing all that well. It doesn't seem like the creatures are thriving, are they? And what happened to the androids? Like, why was Grandmother dead? Like, if the humans voluntarily devolved themselves, why are there not still, like, androids keeping an eye on them? Like, what killed Grandmother? You know? Yeah, and the use of video games was funny, wasn't it? So grandmother, like as part of her plan to devolve humanity into inhuman creatures, like part of that is like the food, I think, like eating the algae from the water, because we know that Tempest's baby seems to have become mutated and is starting to devolve into a mermaid through like the milk that she drank. So I think it's sort of in the biosphere. I wonder if it's even like an engineered virus. Like there's this transformative like nanotech biovirus that is in the ecosystem of Kepler 22b that devolves people into creatures. Like maybe that was released into the ecosystem. But also part of grandmother's plan is to install these video games into everyone's settlements, and the video games have this, I guess, like some sort of like hypnotic effect that like suppresses human consciousness and like, you know, like I guess there's a physical transformation that takes place through like eating the food and being exposed to certain chemicals, but I guess there's also like a psychological cognitive devolution that takes place, and it seems as though this video game is like part of that plan. Just start playing. The little one has already joined, which was I found that an incredibly creepy moment. Like even the baby is playing the game like without even knowing, you know, like what the fuck sort of game is this? And we're told next to nothing about how this game works or what it really is. Like it looks to me like a form of hypnosis. Like the kids aren't even like interacting with it as far as like Campion sort of touches it, I guess. But like they're just staring at like these hypnotic floating lights, like they're tripping or something. It's just this entrancing hypnotic thing, which video games can do. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who have spent an ungodly number of hours playing Elden Ring in the last week or two. Video games can have like a hypnotic, like capturing the mind, engaging the mind, like wiring you into some kind of dopamine cycle. Like video games can do that. But yeah, they haven't really explored yet how that's gonna work or what that's gonna look like. But it is intriguing. Yeah. What are you guys saying in the chat? The baby is playing because it's already devolving. Oh yeah. That's a good point. Life form in the live chat. The baby is playing the game because the baby has already got like webbed fingers and stuff. It's the metaverse. Oh, it's Zuckerberg plugging everyone into the metaverse. That's how we're gonna make everyone docile sheeple, isn't it? Yeah. Oh my god. Cognitive devolution. Yeah, let's talk about Cookie Clicker. Yeah, all right. I do feel a bit teased by like Marcus. Marcus said, like Marcus basically is angry at God. He wants to kill God, and he knows that God is down in the pit. And he knows that this is an elevator down into the pit. So Marcus, you know, goes and lowers this cage, and Marcus intends to get into the cage and go down and face God. Doesn't seem like a fight that he's going to win, but I was very excited for Marcus to go and confront the entity that killed his girlfriend Sue. But he gets in there, but nope, Lucius shoots him, and Lucius captures him and crucifies him. And I think Lucius says that Lucius is going to go down there in Marcus's place, but that doesn't happen in the end. So I'm disappointed that we didn't get to see that confrontation. I think that like Mother and Father went through the soul entity before at the finale of season 1, but now that we really know that the entity is the core, is the bad guy, it's going to be really interesting to get like a confrontation there. So what else? I'm very curious about this text that was written by Vril. Last episode, when Vril died, Vril said that she was recording the diaries of the original human Vril. And I love the way that Campion like records the data like it's some kind of holy text. Like this looks to me like the beginning of a religion, you know? Like you get some scrap of text, some ancient papyrus scroll that becomes the foundation of some new religion that totally changes the meaning and the context, you know? Like turns out that this holy text is just like a robot's memory of a human little girl's diary. Like, it's a weird thing to make as the basis for a religion, but there have been weirder things, that have turned into religion. It reminds me of like the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. Like the fact that it's incomplete, like Campion only gets like a part of each line. And I thought it was funny how Paul was like, oh yeah, I can read that. Like, that's some pretty basic encryption. I can read robot encryption, which is like, wait, you can? You can, Paul? You can read encryption? Yeah, this moment here. It's a pretty simple encryption model. I could probably eyeball it. I feel like they should have mentioned earlier that Paul is like a hacker man. But I'm very curious to find what's on this text. Because Paul just says, "Oh, it's just some dopey Earth stuff." He doesn't think it's significant, but I'm sure it will be significant in some way. We know that Human Vril's mother, Decima, made weapons that were being used to destroy the Earth or something. Maybe information about those weapons is encoded in Vril's last testament, and the humans next season will be able to use that weapon. Perhaps against Grandmother or against the Marcus Antichrist or whatever. It'll be really interesting to see like what is the bad guy next season. Will it be Marcus, the instrument of soul, or will it be like rebelling against Grandmother? I tend to think that Grandmother will become not a villain. Because, like, her whole plan of devolving humanity is like this harsh, cold, rationalist plan, robotical plan. But all of the robots in this series have started out cold, rational, and calculating, and then have become more human through their exposure to the human children. And Grandmother has already begun to experience that. This is new to her. I think we're sort of seeing a similar process to what we saw with Mother and Father in the beginning of Raised by Wolves Season 1. They originally were robotical, but they became more human. I imagine that Grandmother also will become more human, so I could imagine her having like a character transformation similar to Mother and eventually becoming a more sympathetic character, potentially. Or maybe she'll stick to her guns and she'll have to be like destroyed next season. I don't know. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how she progresses, and she definitely is like a continuation of, she definitely does evoke like the rogue AI sort of concept. Kwan in the live chat says, those Campion scriptures are the Mithraic scriptures found on Earth. Maybe. I mean, I don't see why human Vril's diary would contain the information. Like the Mithraic scripture is written as scripture. Like, there were a few times in season 1 where the Mithraic quote from the Mithraic scripture, and it sounds like, generic Bible-y sort of, thou shalt be in the light of the god, or he will smote thee with a really big hammer. Like that. Like, I don't imagine Vril's diary reading like that. But certainly this is very scripture-like. So I could see it having some sort of religious significance. I mean, one of the other really cool things going on this episode, there's a festival to celebrate the defeat of the serpent, which is so cool. Like, we're seeing like the beginnings of a culture and a mythology. Like this is a unique culture, the humans of Kepler 22b, and they are developing their own rituals and their own ideas based on the events and the happenings in their environment. And so that includes like this, yay, the snake is dead. And I wonder if this might become like a festival, like a repeating annual ritual. Maybe every year they will celebrate the death of the serpent, and they'll keep on doing it to the point where no one even remembers the real actual events that inspired the tradition, but they keep doing it anyway. Like Christmas and like solstice and like all sort of, pagan festivals that evolve into a different kind of festival in different religions. And like we have so many traditions in the real world where no one even remembers like exactly how they began. And I feel like that's what we're seeing the beginnings of here with this festival. And one of the other things that we see is that there's like a child who creates a little cross that represents Mother, the prophet. Like, and there's a religion starting around Mother. Where is that moment? Yeah, here we are. this little girl creates a little statue of our savior, Lamia, the serpent killer. And obviously it looks like, a Jesus on the cross, Christian sort of an icon. But this is a religion that's starting around Lamia. And like this like traitor atheist is like, well, that's kind of weird, but like, all right, I kind of dig it. And grandmother says, oh, don't be an idiot. Like, don't follow religions. Even atheists will make up gods to pray to. But the trader woman is like, yeah, like fuck it, like I'm keeping it, and she wears it around her neck. So this is the beginning of a new religion, and the deep irony of it is that Mother is a robot whose mission is to start an atheistic, irreligious colony. And this has been one of Mother's challenges since season 1, since the beginning. Mother has always been trying to create an atheistic, irreligious culture, but humans constantly tend towards religion. And so even the atheist robot herself is made into a mother goddess, And I think that just sort of continues this theme throughout the whole series about how religious rituals, religious feelings, religious beliefs are just like part of the human condition. Like not everyone participates in religion, but there is a tendency within all of us towards those kinds of feelings. And so like I guess we can question like, well, how should we deal with that? Like as people, how do we deal with the religious inclinations and the religious feelings and the ritual and the spiritual feelings that are within us? Like, obviously, organized religion can be a bit of a disaster sometimes, because you can sometimes end up with tyrannical, abusive, dogmatic assholes in charge, like Otho, the rapist, like many rapist priests, like any kind of centralized, organized religion. Sometimes there are abuses of power in any kind of centralized power. And sometimes religious dogma is used to oppress people. I don't need to sit here and tell you the dangers of religion, but that's certainly something that is explored by this show. And so this show is constantly thinking about like, well, what are these religious feelings inside us? How can we express them in ways that aren't too destructive, but can be constructive? And like, one of the themes of the show is faith in each other. Our faith in our loved ones, our faith in our family, our faith in our people, how that can be a positive force. Thanks for the super chat from Premium Water, who says, Marcus was shown in the St. Peter's cross position, the upside down crucifixion. St. Peter is the founder of the Catholic Church, so is or was he the founder of the new Mithraic? I mean, I feel like Lucius is trying to sort of be the founder of like a new Mithraic faith, because Lucius is the last Mithraic believer. I mean, meanwhile, with like the little girl and her like idol, we are seeing the beginning of another like a religion of Lamia, a religion of Mother. So that's like a new religion that's being founded, I think. But yeah, is Marcus going to be the foundation of a new religion like St. Peter? I mean, I think that Marcus is a tool of the entity soul. I think he is like a dark prophet. I think he is like an antichrist. And I don't expect him to be doing a lot of talking. Like, he looks to me like he's dead, and I think he might just be used as a weapon. Or maybe we will start hearing the voice of the entity through Marcus. Maybe like the entity will speak with Marcus's dead mouth. That would be very scary and cool. Or maybe Marcus will still exist in some form and will come back in some form. So yeah, like, I mean, like, maybe the entity will try to like create a religion. Like, because that's what the entity does. That's the entity's modus operandi. It creates and uses religious influence through its priests, through its prophets. It uses its voice to lead people, to lead others. That's what it did with Marcus in season 1. That's what it did with Paul in season 1. That's what it did with the mouse and with Tally the ghost. It creates these like human figures that become like beacons of influence upon more humans, like an infection, like an infectious superstition, like the Missionaria Protectiva. And so I expect the entity will continue a similar strategy, trying to use Marcus to influence other humans. So yeah, maybe it's about creating a religion. I wonder what Lucius's place in all of that is, because Lucius was under the impression that he was going to be the leader of the new Mithraic religion. He was going to be the true prophet. He was going to be the king, which is the same lie that the entity used to manipulate Marcus in season 1. So the entity is continuing to do what the entity does. I really enjoyed what happened with the snake, because like the entity's plan with the snake was that it grew the tree as a way to channel its influence into the tropical zone. And the snake, I think, is meant to be some kind of a weapon or some kind of instrument of power that it was going to use to try and destroy the planet, maybe to like wipe out or subjugate the humans, to make more snakes, and then eventually to have the power to destroy the planet, which is apparently the entity's goal. That failed when Mother killed the snake, but it turns out there was a sort of a backup plan within the snake, because the snake, goddamn, where is that moment in the episode? The corpse of the snake had a tree grow up from within it. Where was that moment? Here we are. So the snake is dead, but then the roots of the tree grow out through the corpse of the snake, and then the tree like emerges. It erects itself from within the body of the snake. And I guess this is like a backup plan, you know? The entity was hoping that the snake would be able to do its thing, but the power of the tree is still within the snake, so the entity still has some influence here. And so the entity guides Lucius to turn Marcus into a Necromarcus through the power of the tree. So I think Necromarcus is like a lesser instrument. Like the entity would prefer to be using the snake, but Marcus is like the entity's backup plan. I do find it slightly ridiculous that like there was no one there to see this happen to the snake. Like I feel like this giant dead monstrous Lovecraftian snake corpse is like the most interesting thing that has happened to the random atheist colony in years. I feel like all of the atheists would be there, like just checking it out. I mean, maybe it just smells so bad that they want to stay away or something. But like a beached whale, like these atheists don't have a whole lot in the ways of entertainment. You know, they're all pretty bored of playing Necromancer Killer, right? I feel like, you know, but whatever, that's a small nitpick. Thanks for the super chat from Brennan Orya, who says, have thoroughly enjoyed all of these deep dives. Hope season 3 isn't far away. Thanks. Thank you, Brennan. I'm glad you're enjoying the streams. Thanks for the super chat from Chris Green, who says, do you think the fruit protects humans from de-evolving? I mean, there would be a symbolic sense to that, wouldn't there? That would kind of make sense if the fruit protected against de-evolution. Let's pull up season 2, episode 7 real quick. Because that last episode started with everyone like eating the fruit from the Tree of Knowledge. And the whole thing about the Tree of Knowledge is that, you know, it does the opposite of de-evolution. The fruit of the Tree of Knowledge is meant to give you knowledge, is meant to free you from the Garden of Eden. Like, it gives you original sin, but it makes you like more human. It gives you freedom, it gives you agency, it makes you grow up into an adult, and that's the opposite of the de-evolution. And again, like, you know, I'm not an expert on Christianity or the religion or the mythology here. This is just my like half-brained interpretation or impression of what the symbolism is. I'm sure there's other people who have different interpretations, but my interpretation of what's going on here, at least in the, you know, the Christian story of the Garden of Eden and the tree, is that it's about gaining knowledge, growing up, maturing, learning about good and evil, learning about sex, losing your childlike innocence and naivety forever. Whereas Grandmother is putting everyone back into an innocent, naive state of nature. So maybe eating the fruit protects you from devolving. But like, Yeah, the fruit definitely didn't help Marcus. Ms. T points out in the live chat. Yeah. So Marcus didn't seem protected, but I mean, I don't think anything can protect you from what happens to Marcus. Yeah, I mean, maybe the fruit is significant, but I mean, also like the thing about the fruit, I think the main purpose of the fruit was to feed the serpent and to lure the serpent to eat the tree, to turn the serpent into a mega necro serpent. So maybe the fruit doesn't have much significance. I feel like if the fruit was significant, they would have talked about it this episode in the finale. I mean, they did in this episode, like they showed us that like Campion did not eat the fruit, which I think kind of felt significant, but maybe it's only like symbolically significant. Like Campion still has his innocence. Something that I was wrong about this episode was that I thought that there was going to be a moment where Campion's compassion for the snake would become relevant. I mean, it kind of does, but I was expecting there to be some kind of moment between Campion and the snake, where Campion tried to like connect with the snake and tried to calm down the snake, and maybe there would be a moment of like, oh, the snake is actually like a pretty chill dude before the snake was killed. That didn't happen. I was wrong. They did have a moment though where Campion like confronts Mother and says like, hey, like, I think it's fucked up that you killed my brother, Mum. Like, this serpent was a cool dude, and it's fucked up that you killed it. And Campion was also saying, Vril has a soul. Vril was human. I loved Vril. So Campion's like all-encompassing compassion and sympathy is still one of his defining characteristics, and that sort of turns him against Mother, because Mother becomes this robotical, murderous monster. And there is something wonderfully ironic about Mother saying, "Why would you choose to love a machine?" Mother says to Campion, which of course is so ironic because, Campion loves the machine Mother because of the way that they raised him. So it's sort of this cruel reminder that I guess in some ways, at least when she's wearing the veil, Mother really is just a machine. And so it's really cruel for Campion to have to confront this robotical, murderous side of Mother again. FM Aries in the live chat says, a lot of people seem to think that the snake was good. But then why did it attack that tank and Mother and Father and Vril? Yeah, I mean, the serpent was a destructive force. And we sort of talked about that a bit in the last live stream, saying how, like, it's like a tiger. There's something in its nature, there's something in its DNA that causes it to be a predator, that causes it to be destructive. That doesn't mean that it's evil, that just sort of is part of its nature. But the other thing is that, it's just a child. It's just a baby. Can we really blame it for not knowing how to behave? Like when Mother pulled its brain out through its eye, Mother says the snake must have been very intelligent. So, maybe if, the snake had more time and better circumstances, and, maybe if it was given more attention instead of being locked in a cave all of this season, maybe they could have domesticated the snake, trained the snake, talked to the snake, grown the snake's intelligence to the point where they could communicate with it. Like, who knows what could have been possible? But alas, Like, I tend to think that there was, like, a serpent civilization almost. I tend to think that the serpents were more than just monsters. Like the network of pits that were like a subway system for the serpents to travel around the planet, like, seems to imply that the serpents had their own life to some extent. I think of like the snake people in All Tomorrows by C.M. Kozeman. So I think, I think we definitely are meant to feel bad for the snake when the snake is killed. And this was such like a wonderfully bizarre, cosmic confrontation between Mother and the snake when she has to kill her child. And it is so sad that the snake tried to like feed from Mother, but found that Mother had closed her nipple ports, and so the snake could not get milk from Mother anymore. And so, the serpent was looking to Mother for nurturing and for care, but instead it gets death. So I think we definitely should feel sorry for the snake here. I love the look of these shots with the two of them hovering above the planet. It's kind of crazy. I'm pretty sure space does not look like this, not to the blind eye, not with all these bright, colorful nebulae in the background, but it does look great, and I think that was fun and absurd. And one of the other consequences that we get told about, like because Mother did this destructive explosion in the sky. Interesting to see this faint geometric pattern on the sky. We are told that this attack disrupted the electromagnetic field over the tropical zone, and that causes a change in climate in this region. It is no longer warm and lovely, and like the fruit will no longer grow here, and so this is going to change the environmental conditions and make it harder for humans to survive here. Which I like, because one of the interesting parts of season 1 was just the struggle to survive, the struggle to find food, the struggle to find warmth and shelter. I kind of like those sort of grounded struggles that they must face, and that also sort of reminds me of Lost, because Lost is a show where they sort of had those basic survival challenges at the same time that they were grappling with supernatural threats. So it is feeling very Lost-like to me, in good ways as well as in bad ways. Thanks for the super chat from Lynn, who says, do you think it's possible that the Entity was the first to influence Tally, telling her to jump into the hole back in season 1? Or did she fall? That is a great idea. It never occurred to me, but that does make sense to me. Because Tally back in season 1 was one of the original children, who was created by Mother and Father, grown from an embryo, grown from a bean, and she was like wandering along, and she fell into a pit and died. But then she came back in the form of a very creepy ghost, controlled by the Entity. The Tally ghost told Campion to kill himself, so the Entity is not a fan of Campion, which still I don't fully understand. But it was Tally that guided Mother to the simulation pod where Mother had sex with the simulated Sturges and gave birth to the snake. So Tally was one of the Entity's first instruments, at least in the form of the ghost. And yeah, I think that is a good theory, that maybe the Entity spoke to Tally, because this was outside the EMF field. This was where the Entity of Soul could speak to people. And it's interesting that, Tally had this doll, which itself is sort of like a religious idol. And, it even has this head that looks like the shape of the Mithraic sun. So maybe, the fact that Tally had this like religious idol made her more susceptible to the Entity's voice. So maybe the Entity did, trick Tally or lead Tally into falling into the pit, so the entity could use Tally's ghost to influence people. I mean, I kind of dislike that. I mean, it feels a little bit inconsistent to me that like other people have fallen into the pit, like those Mithraic people when Marcus went down in the cage, and those Mithraic people haven't come back as ghosts. Why not? I suppose maybe because they were in the tropical zone and the EMF field, maybe that prevented that. But yeah, I think that's a good theory, Lynn. I think maybe the Entity may have had something to do with that. Thanks for the super chat from Cairo, who says, it's weird of Campion to take such a small section of the text. Vril wrote a whole essay. Think he's going to go back for more of the code? Yeah, I think that would make sense. And like this place is marked by this stone cairn. How do you pronounce it? Cairn, Cairn. This grave that Campion built for his dead robot crush Vril, and that marks the place where the scripture was made, where it's inscribed upon the wood. I don't know how long this tree is going to last. Maybe it'll last better when it's like frozen in the snow in the new climate conditions. But yeah, I could absolutely see in season 3 if they go, oh my god, this like fragment of the scripture that Vril wrote, it's totally important. It has a weapon that we could use against the Necromarcus. So we've got to go and find the tree. We've got to find Vril's grave to get the information to save the day. Like I could totally see that happening. Yeah. Hutton, thanks for the donation, says, you're referring to the fruit as from the tree of knowledge, but it was from the tree of life. Yeah, maybe there's a distinction there. Again, like I'm not an expert on all of this symbolism, but I think they are definitely going for a like Garden of Eden theme here and like a Christian theme. And like my limited understanding of like the story of Genesis and stuff is that it's the tree of knowledge that Adam and Eve eat the fruit from. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that was my impression of what that was about. But yeah, maybe it's not about knowledge. That was just my interpretation. What are you guys saying in the live chat? Sabrina says, this whole story is like how European leaders stole Egyptian way of life, sun god Ra, and Isis as Mother Earth. Yeah, well, there's certainly a long history of different cultures appropriating each other's mythology and changing the meaning. It's like how the Romans sort of took the Greek gods and gave them different names and gave them different meanings, and there's certainly a long history of that. FM Aries says, maybe there will be a way to repair the EMF field. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Because, yeah, this could be a giant fucking problem that they no longer have this safe, warm, temperate zone to live in. Maybe the scripture that Vril wrote down might contain some information about how to repair the EMF field. Because, like, one of the sort of important bits of lore that they keep mentioning is that Earth was ruined environmentally by the holy war between the atheists and the Mithraic. And there was like low oxygen levels on Earth, and like we saw that the original Marcus and Sue were like eating rats to survive, and it was really the environmental breakdown caused by these weapons of war that destroyed the Earth and forced everyone to leave. And so, you know, now that humans are sort of affecting the climate and changing the climate of this planet as well, you've got to wonder if that's going to continue to be a theme. Springborn says syncretism, and yes, syncretism is one of my favorite words because syncretism, when something is syncretic, it is combining influences from multiple different cultures or ideas or religious traditions and putting things together in a weird way. And there are lots of real religious traditions where, you know, sometimes there's been like colonization or something, and so you combine like local ancient religious traditions with new imported colonized religious traditions, like mixtures of like Christianity and like local existing religions have been mixed and matched together in some really interesting ways. So you get like these hybrid religions. There are lots of real-world examples of that, which I always find really cool. And yeah, Raised by Wolves, I guess, is an example of syncretism, because it takes a little bit of what I see as Norse mythology, and it takes a lot of like Christian mythology, and it takes the Mithraic religion. I forget what the real one is called. It's like Mithraism or Mithraism, which was a real ancient Roman religion back in like the early, around like 0 AD or sometime. The Romans had this ritual, the tauroctony, and this religious symbol of a bull that was being sacrificed for the sun god, and there was like a snake drinking from the blood, which was all used in Raised by Wolves season 1 episode 10. So I really like that combination of different religious ideas and influences, because one of the things that you can do by like comparing and combining religious traditions is you can see similarities between them. You can see differences between them. You can see similarities. You can see like, and that sort of is an argument for this idea that like there are religious inclinations within all of us, shared within all cultures. Like we all have these tendencies. We want to perform rituals for the dead. We want to feel connected to the dead. We want to feel like there's a purpose. We want to feel like someone's in charge. We want to feel like there's order to the world. We feel like sacrifice is sometimes necessary. Like there are all these sort of common themes and ideas that are really fascinating. And there's like, you know, Jungian archetypes and psychology theories about, you know, the ways that these common stories affect us. And you can have all sorts of theories like, you know, human evolutionary psychology about how like maybe the reasons why we have these particular religious beliefs is because those beliefs help us survive in the natural world. And, you know, there's a certain amount of bullshit mixed in with some of those scientific theories, I think. But it all is enormously fun to speculate about. Thanks for the super chat from No Nonsense, who says, as above, so below. There are two entities, one in the planet, one in space. So, like, I do I do find it interesting, this idea that there may be multiple entities. Because it's been established explicitly multiple times that the entity can't speak to people through the EMF field. The EMF field blocks the voice of the entity. That's why the entity needed to create this tree. This tree was like an aerial to allow the entity to speak to humans and to wield its influence in the EMF zone. But if that's the case, if the entity is unable to speak to people through the EMF field, how did the entity speak to Sue? Sue heard the voice of the entity, and the entity told her to go and grow the tree from the seed. How is the entity speaking to Sue? Like the whole thing makes no sense if the entity spoke to Sue to grow the tree so that the entity could speak to people. You know what I'm saying? That makes no fucking sense. And like maybe like, I don't know, like the snake is a kind of limited aerial or conduit. Maybe grandmother is some kind of conduit. But Sue was having these weird visions, and Sue was hearing the voice of God. And so it's like, how was that happening? And some people are theorizing there must be some other entity that works by some other force. And I'm not 100% convinced of that, because like the voice that was speaking to Sue, like it was operating by the same plan. Like this voice that Sue heard, it told her to grow the tree and make the snake, which was the plan of the soul entity at the center of the world. So I'm not convinced that there are two entities, but I am definitely confused as to how the entity spoke to Sue through the EMF field. Maybe Sue is like especially susceptible or vulnerable to the voice because of her emotional state. Maybe grandmother or the serpent are conduits. Maybe I don't know. Andy in the live chat says that Sue was in the tarantula, which was parked outside the EMF. Is the tarantula parked outside the EMF? I didn't get that impression. Astro says maybe because Sue prayed, she reached out to Sol. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, all right. Adil says, yeah, Sue wasn't in the tropical zone. She was on the tarantula. In episode 1, they explained that the tarantula wasn't in the EMF zone. Oh, okay. Okay, all right. I guess you guys must be right. I didn't realize that, but apparently the tarantula is outside of the thing. Okay. All right, that kind of makes sense to me. Sorry, what was someone saying? Someone said something smart. Damn it. Someone said something smart, and I forget what it was. Yeah. All right. So there was a cool line. There was a cool line that that felt revealing, where grandmother said something about how, like, you know, once the humans are devolved and they're like safely reduced to like creatures, the entity will no longer have power. It will slumber. So it very much has the feeling of like a Lovecraftian god. Yeah. So like, grandmother describes her plan. Like, her mission is to ensure the everlasting life of human beings, and so they're going to be devolved into like simpler, happier versions of human beings. And I like this, you know, very robotical like justification. In order to produce the necessary answer, I had to alter the equation. Like, she's done the math, and this is like the one way to protect humanity is to change what humanity is, you know? She's got to like change some of the variables to get the required calculation, you know? It is logical. So again, like, they're making it very clear that like grandmother's decision to devolve humanity, this is not like an emotional decision. This is very much a rational, robotical calculation. And as we have seen, the androids become less robotical and less calculating when they are exposed to humans and become more human themselves. So I totally expect grandmother to change her thoughts and her feelings on this plan next season. Maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. Maybe she will become more of a tyrant. I don't know. Mother gets really angry, declares she's going to destroy grandmother, which, I don't know, I this is nitpicky, but I found that to be one of Mother's less compelling performances. I really enjoy Amanda Collins' performance as Mother. For some reason, her like rage and her threats didn't feel all that. I don't know. That didn't land as well for me personally, but you know, I do enjoy her performance a lot. I love Grandmother saying that you're still very young for an android, Lamia. Like you have a lot to learn. You have some growing up to do. You're just a child. And I like this idea that Grandmother is older and Grandmother is more cynical as a result. You know, like I guess Grandmother in her own way has, you know, symbolically eaten from the tree of knowledge. She has grown up. She has accepted the need for necessary sacrifices. She's been around the block. She has died and come back. You know, and so the sort of harsh realities that she has faced, I think, explain her drastic measures. You know, whereas Mother is more young, more naive. She has not yet been convinced of the necessity to do extreme things. It's interesting that Grandmother specifically says the humans will go into the water. So is she specifically planning for the humans to become mermaid type creatures? Because we've seen like the more terrestrial creatures that sort of climb around the pits, and we've seen the more like aquatic creatures that become mermaids. It seems like a challenging production decision to decide to make humans into the mermaid people, because like it's not easy to film underwater, right? I'm not expecting to see, you know, Campion and Paul and Hunter and Tempest and Vita turn into mermaids and start swimming around the ocean. I think that would be challenging from a production standpoint. So you know, I don't think Grandmother's plan will succeed. I would expect a lot of humans to start getting webbed fingers and stuff. That'll be fun. But I don't expect Grandmother to succeed. But Grandmother says this thing, after the humans have gone into the water, the entity will return to its slumber, which is very much like, you know, that which is dead doth lie eternal, or like whatever that like Lovecraft line is about Cthulhu. Like Cthulhu is this unspeakable, incomprehensible, alien, ancient monster, and it wants to destroy everything insofar as it wants anything. And the only thing you can really do with Cthulhu is just try not to wake it up. Try not to let it, you know, come and destroy us all. And like the entity on Kepler 22b, Cthulhu gives people these dreams and gives people these voices. Sensitive people, traumatized people are sensitive to Cthulhu's influence. And Cthulhu influences these people to create cults and create religions in order to perform these evil rituals. And that is part of the process by which Cthulhu reawakens and reemerges and destroys the planet. So Aaron Guzikowski is very heavily borrowing from Lovecraft lore and Cthulhu lore. And I think that's a very illuminating way that we can try and understand this entity, is that it is a Lovecraftian horror. It is a godlike, demoniacal intelligence from a bygone age that is a destructive force beyond the ken of humanity. And the best we can do is try not to wake it up, try not to worship it, try not to think. It is this dark thing lurking in the consciousness of every human, and it taps into some primal horror within us all, and we must not wake it up. That I think is a very cool and effective thing for the story to draw from. Yeah, what is dead may never die. And I think that still is compatible with the idea that the entity is a rogue AI, like in some previous bygone age, when there were technologically advanced humans on Kepler 22b, they created this artificial intelligence and it went rogue. Because, you know, the entity looks similar to the Trust AI. So I think, you know, in the same way that the Trust kind of was a bit of a dick and kind of got out of hand and looked like it wasn't going to give power back to humanity, I think the entity might be a similar thing. All right. Thanks for the super chat from the donation from Hutton, who says, Adam and Eve were tricked by the servant into eating from the tree of knowledge. That was the original sin. God cast them out of Eden to be sure they didn't also eat from the tree of life, lest they become God's equal. Okay, all right. Is that the story? Yeah, I'm not an expert on this stuff. Is the tree of life like immortality? Is the tree of life what makes you a god? So, like, humanity got sort of halfway there by getting knowledge, but they didn't achieve full apotheosis by eating from the tree of life. Is that the story? Yeah, I'm sure there are different versions of the story, but I don't know. So maybe we can understand the tree in Raised by Wolves as being more of a tree of life. It's more about like power. This is a tree of empowerment more than it is a tree of knowledge. Yeah, that might be a better interpretation of what the tree means. You might be right, Hutton. Thanks for the super chat from No Nonsense, who says, my thought comes down to when the EMF came down, the first satanic symbolism comes into play. I mean, I feel like, depending on your definition, we've had some pretty satanic symbolism all through this show. I mean, we've had the whole sort of serpent thing. We've had like the fiery pits, the fire within the sphincter of the temple, worshipping, there's been blood and sacrifice throughout. I think I don't know, depending on what you define as Satanism, I think there's been a bit of that. But yeah, I mean the upside down cross definitely feels like a heavy dose of Satan to me. Code B says, I like your content, might try and get you to do a collab when my channel gets a little more notoriety. Kemet says, they were kicked out of the garden before they could eat from the tree of life. From Seed to Shadow says, I'm just bummed I have to wait till the story will unfold further. Yeah, I mean, I am hoping with the rest of you that Raised by Wolves Season 3 will be confirmed. As far as I'm aware, there is no official confirmation that there will be a Raised by Wolves Season 3, but I certainly am hopeful that there will be one. I believe that the series creator said that he has a 5-season plan, and I very much hope that Aaron Guzikowski and Ridley Scott get to fulfill their plan and we get to see the full story. We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. Let's have a look at the after show, shall we? There is no on the next episode, of course, but we do have some interviews and things with the show's creators. So what do they say? Aaron Guzikowski talks about the veil that reduces your emotions. Abby X talks about, the sadness of killing the serpent, a feeling of betrayal. Ray McIntyre talks about, Lucius wants to punish Marcus, and they actually physically held Travis upside down, which is kind of funny. He kind of looks like a clock, doesn't he, on the tree? And again, like I find that whole sort of Norse vibe with Travis's tree hanging quite interesting, because the serpent loses an eye, like Odin losing an eye, and like Vril's inscription is like the runes that Odin learns about, and even like the serpent evokes like isn't there like a Midgard serpent called Jodorowskur or something? It starts with a J. There's a big serpent in Norse mythology. I feel like they're definitely drawing from the Norse here. And Vril is very scary. And Vril was so validated by Campion's love and attention. And father's feeling towards grandmother are complicated, says Abubakar Salim. Because he made her and he's like kind of in love to her, but like he's still loyal with mother. So yeah, I am really looking forward to how father and grandmother's relationship develops in season 3. And I'm also very interested to see what happens with mother, because mother is now like trapped in a simulation. She's like trapped alone in this like digital monastery that was used on the Ark by the Mithraic to sort of keep themselves entertained while they were in hibernation. And so I am very curious to see what happens with mother. Like, what is she going to learn? How is she going to change? Is she going to come out of the simulation angrier and more ruthless? Is she going to come out more calm and robotic? I think there's a lot of interesting directions that could go. Yeah, that's what Abby X says. She's trapped with herself and her emotions until season 3. So what is Mother going to get up to in here? All right, I think we're going to wrap up this live stream shortly. If you've got burning questions or stuff that we missed or forgot to talk about, chuck it in the live chat and we'll cover any other stuff. But yeah, like, I mean, overall, I enjoyed this season. I enjoyed the surprises. I enjoyed the character moments. I enjoyed the exploration of the themes of parenthood and religion and relationships and our relationship with the environment. I found Vril to be a cool addition. I think Vril's relationship with Campion was really cool and very scary when Vril became murderous. I feel like this, but in some ways I feel a bit underwhelmed. Like I feel like the serpent was so sort of hyped up, and then the serpent just sort of stayed in a cave for the entirety of season 2. I mean, it burst out of the like the necro serpent and eating the tree. I thought was very cool and very shocking, but then it just died the next episode, and it was kind of like, okay, like it felt like it sort of didn't accomplish much, you know. Grandmother I did enjoy a lot, like sort of father creating grandmother I thought was really cool. The mystery of grandmother was really cool. I think the twist of grandmother trying to devolve humanity is very cool. It makes sense, and it is like thematically interesting and emotionally interesting. Lucius, I feel like Lucius, we don't know enough about Lucius to really care that much about him. Like, I feel, you know, it's sad that he got manipulated by the entity, you know, his sincere religious beliefs getting him fucked over. But I'm curious to see what happens to him next season. I hope that we get more exploration of Lucius. I think the pacing was very weird this season. Like last episode felt like more climactic and more of a finale than this episode did. This episode was quite slow compared to a lot of other episodes this season. I understand from interviews that they filmed season 2 episode 8, the finale, before they had finished writing some other episodes in season 2, which is weird. I think there was a bit of COVID production interruption stuff. So I feel like that, you know, I feel like you can see that there are some, you know, they suffered from having less episodes. They suffered from COVID interrupting production. I feel like you can see that. And, you know, there is a reduced budget. Some of the CGI is not so good. None of that is their fault. And I think the show still holds up. But I'm hopeful that those challenges won't become more of a problem later on. What are you guys saying in the live chat? Golemuk says, thank you, Swifty. It's still a fun show. Not perfect, but still great. And your commentary is the perfect companion. Thank you, Golemuk. Yeah, it's not perfect, but like, as I've said before, I always am more excited for a show that is ambitious and sometimes fails. I'm so much more interested in that than a show that is conventional. Like it succeeds at being conventional. Like I'm not really interested. I like shows that try new weird stuff. Thanks for the super chat from Ethan, who says, does Sol mean for the number 7 to die for the new tree? I don't think so. Like, I'm not sure, but I don't think the entity wanted the snake to be killed by Mother. I think that the entity probably wanted to make more snakes, like more superpowered snakes, and to use them as a destructive force. My interpretation is that this, like, backup tree and this backup, like Marcus the Antichrist, like, I feel like this is, like, a less powerful instrument that the entity is using now, and this is, like, plan B after the snake failed. That's my interpretation. Thanks for the super chat from Joshua, who says, good bad forces balancing out and seeding the cosmos. Yeah, I mean, there's almost like a dualistic Zoroastrian yin and yang sort of a duality happening here. I mean, the sort of the duality of Earth and Kepler 22b, like humanity existing and moving between both of those planets, and the duality of like the Mithraic versus the atheists, the technocrats, the non-believers versus the believers. I find that interesting, and it's interesting how, like, you know, the technology seems to have been created by the atheistic technocrats, and then the technology was appropriated by the religious Mithraic, and then like Campion Sturges sort of took that necromancer technology and took it back for the atheists. Like, there is sort of this long winding back and forth, both in the technology and in the religious beliefs and in the physical planet location of humanity and in the good and the evil, the agents of good, the agents of evil. And there is this demoniacal, satanic soul entity, which seems to be like this evil force. I wonder if there will be some sort of good force. I feel like the good force is humanity. Like, I don't think there will be a good, benevolent God that will appear in this story. I think the goodness is the goodness that we make and the goodness that we choose. I think that is sort of the philosophy of Raised by Wolves. And I think that is sort of, that feels applicable to reality to me, you know? Like I don't think there is a mystical force for good that we can turn to, but I think that we can definitely create goodness through our interactions with each other. So there's your uplifting, optimistic conclusion for this series of live streams. Thank you for the super chat from Vanessa, who says, thank you. I've enjoyed your chats. The ancient aliens are us, says Mitchellanius. Yeah, I do like the whole sort of ancient astronauts vibe of all of this. These prehistoric Neanderthal technocrats who made the technology that we are now using and rediscovering. That's always fun. I think that is one of the great strengths of Raised by Wolves, is that it doesn't just copy, Christian religious ideas. It doesn't just copy Norse religious ideas. It borrows influences from many different sources. And as they say, like, plagiarizing one person is plagiarism. Like, copying one person is plagiarism. But copying dozens of people, that's called research, or that's called inspiration. I think combining all these different ideas and storylines into one sort of syncretic, fun soup of lots of weird flavors, it makes for a delicious broth. Thanks for the super chat from Ms. T, and thanks for all of your chats throughout these live streams. It's been great seeing all you guys' thoughts and contributions. I've heard lots of great ideas from you guys, and it's been a great pleasure discussing this with everybody. Even the YouTube comments are so often a garbage fire, but I've seen so many like cool, interesting discussions happening in the comments and in the live chats. So yeah, thanks so much for participating, everybody. And we'll do more live streams in the future. We're done with Raised by Wolves Season 2. But we did a George R. R. Martin versus Frank Herbert writing analysis live stream recently, and I think we're going to do a part 2 to that soon. And we will do more Game of Thrones Abridged as well in the future. So there will be more on this channel. Remember to like and subscribe. And thanks so much for participating. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Have a good one.